Welcome to Tea Time with Shaylee and Amber. I'm Shaylee Evans, and I'm a life coach for pets and their people. I'm a truth seeker, and it's my passion to empower others and to give animals a voice along the way.
I'm Amber Leidick, and I've been a performance horse trainer focused on behavioral issues for over 20 years. My current passion is creating impactful in-person and online events and collaborating with professionals to be on the leading edge of positive change in the horse industry.
We are two friends invested in theta healing, belief system work, animal communication, and any resources that benefit human-animal partnerships. So turn up the volume and let's dive into the Great Awakening, brought to you by Our Horses. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Today we have a super exciting guest, Emily Frost. Thank you for joining us, Emily.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We are super excited to talk with you. So for those of our listeners who maybe haven't heard of your name before, maybe a little bit of background of what you do.
Yeah, definitely. So right now, I like to label this work as a form of Centaurian artistry, where we merge different modalities, shamanic medicines, astrology, animal communication, all sorts of different healing practices, essentially, into the artistry that is horsemanship. So I started working with horses when I was really little. And of course, like any horse crazy girl, as soon as I got the taste of working with horses, that was it. It was over. Like I was never able to focus on anything else. Every single aspect of my life kind of started to revolve around horses and the time that I got to spend with them. And I had a really unconventional upbringing with them. So I wasn't in sessions or lessons. I was really just allowed to work with the horses and to learn from the horses. And I grew up in a pagan household. So there wasn't any religion. It was all very, very natural. You know, like the great mother, the goddess, was spoken at our dinner table quite frequently. And it was just a beautiful, organic unfolding, really, the love and the evolution of my love with horses. So my horses have always been my teachers, and that's really what has unfolded the journey and the practices that I also like to quote preach. But it's not at all like a step-by-step process. Really, it's quite organic. And the work that I do is really honoring the soma. So it's the animal body of both horse and human, and beginning to create a distinct marking of boundaries between our own personal space and sphere and our horse's personal space and sphere. So it's about empowering, it's about reestablishing that sense of sovereign self. So it's like also a lot about cleaning up how much we've absorbed. A lot of equestrian culture is very left brain, so to speak. And I really like to help people tap into their right brain, getting back into touch with their own sense of authority, getting back into touch with their own internal guidance, and their own wisdom, right? Like the soma essentially is our most pure primordial being. It's rooting us deep. It's returning us back to our intuition and back to our own sense of guidance. It's the internal compass. And so we also do a lot of like reestablishing a connection to our corpus callosum and like coming back into tune with a balanced sense of being, which I think in such a capitalistic world, it's like when you're not connecting to your right brain, it shrinks, right? So like it's a process to exercise that aspect of ourselves. And I think our horses are so here for that journey of reclamation, and they're so ready to help us come back into touch with our own animal self and our own primordial self. And so that's really the journey that I facilitate. That's what Centaurian artistry is about. And of course, there's a lot of healing to that too, because like the actual archetype of the centaur has so much shadow and so much shade to it. And I really love that aspect of the healing journey, like going into shadow work and really reclaiming the medicine and the power that's there. So it's about unapologetically stepping into both the light and the dark aspects of Centaurian artistry and reclaiming and retrieving the medicine and the connection that gives us. In a nutshell.
A few years ago, it felt like I was in this weird world by myself. And thanks to like social media, even though it can be sort of like a wild place, to be able to connect with other people that are doing similar work in their own way makes you kind of feel like, oh, all of that time that I spent thinking that I was like, what am I even doing right now? Searching for anyone that looked like they were doing anything similar so that I could feel like I wasn't like a crazy person trying to smash this in with horsemanship. Um, and it's so ironic that like it was my very first podcast. I think we tried to connect and tried to do a podcast together, and there was like a Wi-Fi issue, and there was like a couple things where we tried to connect like years ago. And then um I'd moved off of that page and started a new one when I kind of changed everything around. And when I'd moved back to it, I found your message, and it was like 2 years later. And I was like, we need to have you on. It's just perfect because obviously the timing is always perfect. But I feel like the evolution of where people are at in their horsemanship journeys now are so much farther, and they're able to hear like an expanded version of something that's not normally talked about, I think, a lot, and like actually receive it and be like, oh, I feel that. Like that feels good to me. I want to explore that rather than it being like, wait, what? So I love the timing of this is so much better than it would have been. So I'm so happy that you've made it on and we get to connect.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. The evolution of this entire world with horses has changed so much in the last few years, and it's so exciting. And I know all too well what it feels like to be, the lone sheep, like just there wasn't very many of us for the longest time. And even in Canada, like sometimes I feel super isolated. Don't get me wrong. And from both like the spiritual community and the horse community, ironically, because it's such a gray area, I think, this type of work. But it's extremely exciting. It's extremely, extremely exciting to connect with like minds. And I'm so looking forward to the next like even 20, 30 years of the continued evolution and expansion of the horse human dynamic.
I'm curious too, just I've been so excited for this conversation because over the last year, so it's interesting, I went through like this little identity crisis, maybe like a little over a year ago, where I didn't want to be the weird one. And I was like the animal communicator, but I was like specializing in the physical body and things that are here and now. And I didn't ever want to bring in even the emotional stuff almost, because there was like a part of me where I was like, people aren't going to believe if I start talking about the heart chakra and how it's connected to your higher self and da, 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 da. And then I'm like, people won't believe that like the trees are talking to their horses and just all this stuff that like I could feel. So I was so worried about being the little weirdo. And I boxed myself into like this animal communication, specific to the physical body thing. And then one of my horses transitioned to the non-physical, and I got so many amazing lessons around that. And then I decided that I was going to call myself a mystic instead of an animal communicator. And that was like such a big thing for me because it just like broadened what I came to offer. And when I made that realization, and after my horse transitioned and kind of told me, and it's so cool because so I did some plant medicine recently, and I was telling Amber like all of the beautiful wisdom that I got from it and like the experience. And there's things that I've always known to be true. Like when Bro transitioned, he showed me my other horse laying next to him and transferring all of his wisdom and lessons like into his physical body. And with every part of my being, I believed it. But then when I experienced the plant medicine last week and I was asking all of my horses on a soul level, like, who are you? Like, I want to experience like you, like the depths of who you are. I literally saw Biggie and I was like, oh my gosh, you're a shapeshifter. You have the lives of 100 horses in you. And I just like saw it in such a like a beautiful, in-depth way. It was so cool. But I say all this to say he's been a really big teacher for me around something that he has labeled the Great Awakening. And it's essentially like this movement from the horse consciousness, the horse collective, away from entitlement to another. So away from entitlement to another's emotional state, their physical bodies, just their way of being. And I've been learning and sharing so many lessons around that. And I'm just curious, like how has that energy or that vibe of the Great Awakening, I think that it's kind of, from what I've heard you talk about on other podcasts and also just what I know of your work and your way of being, I think that you kind of embody the energy of the Great Awakening. But I'm curious, like, how messages might be shifting for you as the community shifts as well.
I love this question. I feel like I need to clear my voice to get ready to answer it. What a fantastic question. Yeah, so Hero's Way is actually named after a Centaurian legacy. It's not my work, it's the work of the horse human dynamic, essentially. And it's the legacy, the prophecy of the unfolding legacy, which is the Great Awakening, essentially. And so I don't know what you know about the Centaurian archetype. Essentially, I mean, all external deities actually function and exist. The intelligences of these archetypes, they reside within us, and it's the left brain that takes them and places them outside of us, right? So centaurs are very real, were very real, multidimensionally, but also, yeah, just consciously. They are an actual energy that exists when we become one with our horses. And in so many ways, many years ago, many civilizations ago, they were mutations that existed to take us into battle. Essentially, that was the first real motive behind creating the centaur, was merging horse and human beings to create an absolute weapon, essentially, right? Like just so powerful. And Kiro was actually a centaur or Cairo, depending on how you want to say it. I actually believe that both pronunciations of his name are accurate because it was the human and horse half, Kiro and then Cairo. But he was actually made from a Kirin, which is, or Chiron, again, however you want to pronounce it, which is a unicorn dragon. And he was very powerful in himself, this horse unicorn dragon being. And so when Kirin regained awareness of his situation in the embodiment of Kiro or Cairo, he decided that he was going to try to reach the consciousness of his human half and create an understanding for his liberation and the importance of his liberation and the importance of the human half and the human's liberation. And they ended up completely connecting and becoming aware of each other's presence within themselves. And they decided that they could not use their strength and power and purity for battle anymore. It just was not aligned. It didn't feel right for them. So they decided that in the next battle, they were going to separate their being. And they knew the only way to do this for the continued evolution of themselves was to die. And they actually ran straight into a spear, severing at the exact point, the heart center, the point that merged horse and human. And they ended up reincarnating as horse and human, but they were still merged. So the human had so many horse qualities to them now, and the horse had so many human qualities to them. And they couldn't actually comfortably exist without each other anymore. So the human went out into the forest and existed with this horse, and they developed their own herd. And so Kiro's Way is the evolution of creating peace and harmony and establishing more balance within the relationship. So no more power over power under dynamics, but instead mutual reciprocity, mutual co-creation and collaboration. And so it's beautiful for me to see how, you know, horses they've fought our wars, they've built our cities and empires, and now they're really just a part of our lives because we can't possibly live without them. And we're constantly trying to find a way to have them live with us as we continue through this moral and ethical evolution for our own humanity. And I think the horse has actually been a symbol of that in so many ways, a symbol of reclaiming our humanity, reclaiming our sovereignty, reclaiming our freedom, which is so, so beautiful in so many ways. And so when I look at like what's happening with the evolution of the horse-human dynamic and the great awakening that not just horses are facilitating, but all animals and the earth, I really feel as if there's this like crumbling of old structures while also still honoring what has always been, because like love is the most ancient essence that exists on this planet, and every single being that's on this earth is capable of it. And I think we're coming back to this, remembering this simplification of something that is both evolutionary and revolutionary, right? We're going back through time, we're repeating these cycles, but we're repeating them in an evolved state, in an evolved way. And so like I've received a lot of these codes because I am part of the legacy of Cairo, and Tacoma, my heart horse, is part of the legacy of Cairo. His bloodline goes right back to Kieran, the original unicorn, as does most of our heart horses, as do most of us horse lovers, heart-centered horse lovers. And you can even say heart-centered, like centaured, you know, like it's a really, really powerful connection, I think, that we all have to these roots of liberation and to the purity of connection and friendship and partnership. And the more that we as a society start to feel the imbalance of, I mean, even just coming back to what we talked about at the very beginning, like left brain versus right brain, right? Like the pendulum is swinging. We can't stay out of balance for so long. We're destined to come back one way. So as we're swinging from, as we're recognizing how imbalanced we've been in our left brain functioning, we're swinging more and more into the right brain. And I think it's so fascinating that, you know, even archetypally, Sagittarius is the ruler of the right brain, and Sagittarius is like the Centaurian archer, right? Like it's the warrior. So it's so beautifully synchronistic in that sense that we are meant to come back into this returning of self. And like I'm very passionate about like advocating for self-empowerment and self-guidance and intuition, and you know, not handing our power away mindlessly, and constantly coming back and opening up the conversation that we have with our soul and letting our actions be guided by our soul. And we can't do that unless we are also allowing that from others. And more people are becoming increasingly attuned and aware of this, as above, so below, as within, so without. And yeah, so I think that right now what we're seeing is this beautiful swing of the pendulum, where we're recognizing that to be empowered means to give another's power back. And we're recognizing the repercussions of karma, which is so Centaurian. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It definitely does. And the I love the explanation of getting like pierced through the heart center, because as I've grown in animal communication and as I'm like teaching it, I'm always so guided. You know, we hear a lot traditionally around connection being through your third eye. And I have always been so guided to move from heart center and just like explore the love that comes from the heart. It feels like so many of us keep our hearts so closed, our cards close to our chest. And I feel like the heart does want to grow and expand and connect like we're all meant to connect and not have so much division. So I love the thought of that. And it also makes me think, just from like a physical perspective, how many we're having a conversation with Celeste the other day and about how our horses like have become kind of collapsed through this thoracic sling. And I just have this um thought process around like protection of the heart. Like the shoulders get imbalanced, the left shoulder gets big and it covers the heart. And I think the more that there's awareness around that, and also um something that Amber has really guided me to, is seeing that human horse connection, because for the longest time, I feel like I'm such a baby in my spiritual journey, because like even though I've been like talking with animals for a while and I've been connecting with them, I feel like I had so much focus on like the animal themselves for forever, until like a year ago maybe, or 2 years ago, where now I'm like, oh my gosh, I have all these symbols and all this new knowledge around how emotion in a person literally will create a physiological change in an animal's body, and how intertwined and connected, and not just like from a perspective of like them picking up your stress, but it's like these soul contracts that they have. And and I think just thinking about the Great Awakening and the entitlement and stuff like that, like when I'm working with my horses and offering them different aspects of our relationship, and I can feel now, and I think the awareness piece is so fun, and I love that you're teaching that, because when you start to create awareness around your heart space and that connectedness, you can totally feel where you're guarded, and then you can move through that, versus how many of us, like you're saying, are so disconnected from our bodies and like what we can feel in our bodies, that we can't even begin to um, like open that up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I think because of that wound, I mean, spiritually, I have my Algonquin medicine rights, and I do a lot of shamanic healing, and I like by collapsing time and going back to those original Centaurian wounds. And what I've found with most like horses, but also humans, is that the wounds around the heart are so profound that there's either like significant scar tissue and density there that needs a lot of work and a lot of healing, or it's like this beautiful portal that has been opened, right? Because wherever the crack is, the light gets let in. So you have these spaces of potentiality. And as soon as we can start to kind of tap back into that original wound, we actually can like be catapulted through the time and space of our evolution individually, like individually horse and human, but also together as a centaur. And I think that we're seeing that right now. We can see a bit of a division in the equestrian culture where people are like clinging to these harmful practices, or they are, and I think honestly, it depends on how much space we've been given to sit with the wounding, and how safe we feel to actually take down these barriers and allow ourselves to come back into the bodies and to return to our empowerment. How can we clean up what we've absorbed over the years with this wounding? How much scar tissue has built up? Like it's definitely a really beautiful space of possibility in all directions, like continued perpetual wounding or expansion and profound healing, which is, I think, like for me personally, I'm going to come back to the stars because I love the map of astrology and the blueprint of the soul, but I have a lot of Libra in my chart. So I'm very, very predestined to come into this life and talk about relational dynamics. But then my seventh house, which is the house of Libra, it's actually ruled by Scorpio for me and Pluto in Sagittarius. So it's like I'm really here to get into the depths and then catapult us up into the light. So like get into the deepest wounds and retrieve the medicine kind of thing. And I find that like in that journey, I'm really like becoming more and more attuned to the fact that like people are being asked to make a choice right now. Are they going to Are they going to continue to block up that heart center and leave it closed, or are they going to open it up and address the portal that is their wounding and step through? And I think people are so tired of playing small and feeling constricted and giving their power away that they're almost just like leaping off the cliff, thinking it's the end and realizing it's the beginning. And it's so exciting to see, because that leap of faith is where the magic happens. I had
Yeah.
this dream once, actually, right when I was receiving this download for the first time. I had a dream the night before, and I was a mountain goat scaling the side of a mountain, and there was just boulders coming from like every which way direction. And I was super overwhelmed, and I didn't know what to do. And I was like kind of like scurrying along the edge of this cliff. And finally, I was like, fuck it. And I just jumped off the cliff. And as I was like falling through the sky, I just turned into a bird and just started flying around the sky, like soaring and dipping. And I ended up waking up and I was like, that's it. That's the medicine. If we can be so detached from the outcome, if we can be so in neutral about the entire process, like, and just go back into our submersion of receptivity, we can actually find that safe space within ourselves again for the evolution. Evolution occurs from the emotional body, but it's not from necessarily controlling the emotion, but riding the wave of it, and going into what we're feeling and moving with it and allowing it to shapeshift us. And I'm like giddy about what I'm seeing right now in terms of like just fearlessness and taking the power back and just jumping off the cliff.
I love that.
And
Well,
people like you guys, like you're helping to lead that way, right? Every time one of us steps into that space and says, no, you know what? I'm not just an animal communicator, I'm a mystic too. Fuck yeah. Yeah, you are. So it's so freaking exciting.
yeah, I love that you talk about, well, first of all, I love the story about the centaur. I'm actually a Sagittarius, so I our astrologist that comes in, she does a monthly cosmic forecast is what we call it. And she's always, anytime I have a session with her, she's always pulling that in. But I don't think this must be like a time in my life where I'm starting to really understand stories behind things that I've seen at a superficial level and been like, I'm connected with that. And then and then it's gone. And now I'm having all these like deep dives in these different places. And so I love hearing that whole story because that is never something I've ever even heard, which is amazing. Um, and I also love that you bring in the shadow work aspect because there was a long time where I was like, I'm going to do this shadow work course, but how am I even connecting it with horse people? Like the connection felt so far. And like you were saying before, where it's like from the spiritual community and then a horse community, there was like this place in the middle where I felt like this is where I'm supposed to exist, but it felt like this void. So the fact that you're bringing the shadow work in, and I feel like that is the most potent, important part because it just becomes this the moment I understood it, learned it, started making it more than a process, but embodying it and being like, just this is just like a way of life. It's like anytime anything comes up, it becomes this like very easy awareness where you're like, oh, that's interesting. And the freakouts and the dysregulation and the panicking and I can't think straight. While the waves, like you were saying, it's like the wave comes through and you're not trying to get rid of it and you're not trying to run from it and avoid it. It's like, oh, this is interesting. I'm just going to get curious about this. While it may feel uncomfortable, I had said the other day I was walking through our orchard and I was like, you know what? Like what I've realized through the process of being committed to like doing that work constantly was that things can get really hard, but like I can always be happy. Like and that was something where I was like, if people understood that there wasn't anything to be afraid of, like the fear of rejection or the fear of, somebody hurting you or you being embarrassed or there was shame or whatever. Like if you weren't afraid of any of that, or if you just allowed it to be part of your experience and not made it be something that you were needed to reject so hard, like you become pretty unfuckable with. Like you can jump off the cliff. You know what I mean? So I love that you're integrating that in because it's like my favorite thing. I love shadow work.
Yeah, and that almost brings me like that brings my mind to the archetype of the unicorn and the Pegasus, right? And like
Mm,
when we can have that insight and that awareness of self, that's where we gain our wings, and that's where we can jump off the cliff and be unfuckwithable, where we
mhm.
can just like take flight and truly, you know, bridge between different dimensions and realms, and we can connect timelines, and all of a sudden our essence and our being and our potentiality is completely limitless. And when we get curious about these feelings that might be a little bit stickier or denser or darker or whatever it is, like those become almost way showers for us
Mhm.
to continue down the path towards freedom. That's so beautiful. What a powerful, fearless journey to be able to embark on. That's no small thing.
Yeah. And it's like you just want that for everyone. You're like, no, really, I swear. I know it looks really scary, but like if you just go a little bit further, you're gonna realize that it's not all what it seems. And we when we had that conversation with Celeste yesterday, and I think everyone that's sort of coming out of the closet and being more open with this and just being like, no, actually, I'm not going to try to make this sound. I feel like I used to try to like hide it and tuck it into clinics and
Mhm.
and courses, and it would be like this thing I would slip in here and there, but it would never be on the outside. Like I would never just say, hey, this is what we're going to do. It was kind of like this thing where I knew it was needed, but also there was a little bit of like, how is this going to be received? I need to like camouflage it a little bit. And yesterday in that conversation, it's like anyone that's kind of here in this place where we're like, no matter what happens, like we're gonna keep going. Like it becomes this, like there is nothing that could happen to make you go the other way. No matter how hard things get. It's like that when you get to that point where you can't just trust and surrender and jump off the cliff, that all of a sudden, like this entire new world opens up for you. And I just want that for everyone.
Once you get your wings, there's no way you're gonna cut them off and hand them over again.
Yeah, I think what's really cool about the shadow work too, and it's funny because Amber is really the one that was the catalyst to me diving into it. And I complained about it for a while because I was like, oh, life was so much easier when I was like non-emotional, totally shut down, like in my own little humanness. And now it's like what I think my favorite part is I went through, and I'm just someone, it's funny because I had an astrology session with Denise Byron. It's like she does like intuitive astrology, and she was talking to me about my chart. I'm a Taurus and I'm like very naturally grounded, but she talks about like all of the intuitive aspects that are in my chart and my innate attunement to others' suffering. And I was talking with her about like my deep dives and how I've always been connected to it's so interesting cuz like I'm connected to like the curiosity of dysfunction and disease and that sort of thing, all the while like really wanting to expand capacity for like love and miracles and things like that. And it's so interesting. I've always kind of um wanted to do that for others, like say, oh, I'm an uplifter and stuff. But ever since I did the shadow work and I dove really deeply in it and I went to like those lowest of lows and those deepest parts and really became aware with of like who I am. I think once you get to that point, you do start to expand your capacity for love and your question of like, what if the worst thing happens? Like Amber and I call them intrusive thoughts. We're like, oh, intrusive thoughts. But like when you are kind of in that area of like tiptoeing around the shadow work, you can get those like, oh, what if the worst thing happens? But what's cool is when you really surrender to the shadow work and you feel into that, then all of the sudden your perspective, or at least in my experience, it's like I now see new opportunities and I'm like, what is the best thing that can happen from this? Like it just totally expands your um like your capacity for love, I guess is what I want to say, but not in the sense of, do you understand what I mean by love? Like not in just like a human sense. I don't know how else to explain it.
Like a whole being essence, like a whole being
Yeah.
self, like a complete returning of home. Yeah, definitely. And that would
So good.
be so, so aligned with like the process of evolution for your soul. So the kind of astrology that I work with is called evolutionary astrology, and it believes in the concept of reincarnation. And so working with the polarity points, if you have a sun in Taurus, that means that you would have been very dominant in an expression of Scorpio in a past life. So that's exactly the polarity point and the dynamic that I think you were just speaking to, right? Is like, and of course Taurus is ruled by Venus. And it's actually, I'm laughing because as soon as you said my sun is Taurus, I was like, yep.
Mhm.
Because when you were first talking about how you don't like to get rid of anything, I'm like,
Yeah.
my fiance is a Taurus and I'm a Libra, and we're both ruled by Venus, but we're like opposite expressions of Venus. And we're the opposite. So like he's the one that doesn't want to get rid of the lawnmower, and I'm the one that's like, dude, we gotta get rid of the lawnmower. But I love it because Taurus is about like rooting and anchoring and creating this beautiful, like luxurious Venusian lifestyle. And you know, there is this fear that Taurus has about survival and comfort and security and sustenance, and that comes from a lot of past life stuff with Scorpio, right? And so like it's really, really beautiful to hear that you're so conscious of that, because it means that you're already actively working with the retrieval of medicine from past lives in this life. So like on an evolutionary standpoint, like you can't really get more powerful than that in a lot of ways. That's really, really cool.
That's actually such a cool thing to think of too, because my shapeshifter horse, the one that I was saying carries like the lives of 100 horses within him, he is a Taurus too. And he historically has had issues with like metabolism, weight gain, like all of like the earthly things that and a lot of what you talk about. And it's so interesting how as I started to understand um his chart or his energy in that way, he's been able to it's interesting how we can relate from that sense, like on an astrological level, and he doesn't have issues around like when you talk about like survival and all of that stuff, like before he came to me, he was starved, and then he became insulin resistant, and just all of these things manifesting in his body around survival and like fighting for his state of being and all of that stuff. And so much of that has softened. And I just got like this little intuitive download, like, yes, this is why like it's all connected, which is just so cool. So thanks for sharing that piece because that's actually awesome.
Yeah, that was part of the reason why I got so into this modality of astrology, because it is so fascinating to me. And also working with polarity points, I had started to see these recurring patterns within Centaurian dynamics where horses and humans, they were either like reflections astrologically. So Taurus with Taurus, Aries with Aries, you know, Gemini with Gemini. But then I started to notice that there was a lot of merging, whether it was through modes or through elements or through like direct oppositional signs. So I would either see like, you know, Gemini with Aries, which is elementally compatible because it's fire and air, or I would start to see like actual crosses of Gemini with Sagittarius or Libra with Aries or Virgo with Pisces. Like I would see these direct oppositions, and it's a completion, right? If you think of a whole, which would be the centaur, and then you divide it into two equal halves, that's where you would start to see like the actual complementary archetype within each other. And so I was like so fascinated by the concept of moving through cyclical cycles and evolving and revolving at the same time. Like what is happening to these souls on a cosmic level? Because I see like our astrological blueprint for anybody who's a little bit confused or curious about astrology, like essentially, in my mind, a keyhole in the stars that our soul is able to move through. And once the keyhole is just right, our soul that fits that's a perfect fit just comes through, and it's a remedy point. So whatever blueprint we're born into in this life is actually a remedy point for the past life, because it's constantly serving our greater evolution. And that's one of the reasons why when we reconnect to our soma, which is connected to our original blueprint, we're coming back into harmony with an intelligence that is serving our highest order of being, attuned to the desire of our evolution on a soul level. And when we can actually come into harmony with our horse, and the only way we can do that is if we give our horse back their sovereignty, if we give our horse back their own sense of self, and we don't try to manipulate it or mutilate it, or put them through the cookie cutter, right? If we actually just come into this relationship of acceptance, we literally catapult that process. Like it just, we feed off of each other, and our growth is just so much more dynamic and explosive and expressive, and it turns into that artistry. So like that Centaurian artistry is essentially the evolutionary process of our souls individually and then together. Because I mean, the first spiritual step is unity. It's recognizing from a individual place, like the multiverses within universes within multiverses within universes, and so on and so forth. So it's like giving us this complete embodiment practice of understanding individuation and individuality, but also collaboration and merging. So it's just like this, yeah, this like powerful dynamic that's just absolutely mind-blowing to me.
Oh my gosh. So I have to ask because I'm curious, and this is just something that like I would love your perspective on, because I have always believed in reincarnation, and I've gotten examples of it through connecting with animals, but I've always just had like a little bit of like a feeling of like I'm not getting the bigger picture. If we can exist, like if our souls are multidimensional and the broader part of us is non-physical, and we're kind of moving in and out of this like multidimensional space, from your perspective, how does reincarnation work? Like can we live in a different time and space as we're in this physical body, or I'm just curious your perspective around reincarnation.
Yeah, so I mean, at this point, my understanding of it feels really blasted open, if I'm going to be completely honest. I recently also went through a pretty profound experience with the death of one of my horses. So, my very first horse, her name was Tiamo, and she was an off the track thoroughbred. She was this long, lanky, beautiful creature who was in her late teens by the time she came into my life. And she taught me, ironically, her name is I Love You in Italian, and she taught me everything about what the true meaning of love is, the true full body essence and embodiment of it. And she ended up like completely falling in love with my mom's horse, Indiana. My mom adopted this horse about 6 months after Tiamo came into my life. And I'm going to tell the story because I explain best through storytelling. So here we go. So my mom adopted Indiana 6 months after Tiamo came into my life, and they were inseparable. And I know now that they were what a lot of people would refer to as twin flames. Now, I speak a lot about Centaurian essence, so I do talk about the merging of souls, but of course we all are in essence individual, but we're also united, right? But there's always this particular compatibility that's either ancient or was a profound mark in our evolution spiritually many lives back, or even in this life. We're always recreating different soul stitches. And so twin flames are things that can constantly be reborn. It doesn't necessarily mean, in my perspective and in my understanding and experience, it doesn't mean that we were one of or two pieces of one entity, but it just means that we became one at some point, and it was so powerful and so influential to us on a soul level, on a spiritual level, that it stuck. And so I realized, after, but at the time, I also subconsciously knew Indiana and Tiamo had that stitch between their souls. And as much as I also have quite a significant stitch with them, they were like bonded so much longer than I could have even acknowledged, right? And it makes sense because they're both horses, so they both like very likely go back even further through time and space, their ancestry and their connection, the history of their connection. So anyway, about 3 years into the relationship with Tiamo, my mom decided to move our horses to a more mainstream boarding stable. At the time, we were at a very, very quiet little barn, and she wanted to go to a place with an indoor arena and everything else. And they decided at this barn to separate Indiana and Tiamo into separate pastures. And within 2 weeks, Tiamo passed away of a heart aneurysm. Just her heart broke, literally, from being separated from Indiana. And so I went through this deep, deep grief with Indy, and she almost became a sort of angel of death. After Tiamo passed away, she would visit us in the in-between all the time, either elementally as the wind or as a bird of prey on the wind. And you know these things because you start to have very, very supernatural encounters and experiences with these elements or with these animals, right? And so I would be sitting on Indiana and I would be crying and just feeling her. And she was like this big, beautiful black Percheron mare. She was so comfy. And I would just be like backwards, head on her bum, just sobbing. And I would like look up and there would just be this hawk sitting there holding space for us. And she came in the form of a red-tailed hawk all the time for us. And then eventually Tacoma, my heart horse, who's grown with me in this life, he came into our lives and he bonded with Indy, and Indy helped to raise Tacoma just the way Tiamo had raised Indy. And eventually my mom ended up selling Indiana. She just moved on with her life, and I was a teenager still, and I was only capable of providing and paying for my horse, which was always a responsibility that I had. And so I couldn't afford two, and I had to see her go, and I felt like I was losing a sister. Fast forward to when I turned 18, and I decided to find her and buy her back. So we welcomed her back into our family. The reunion with her in Tacoma was just absolutely magical. And I ended up, just really like dedicating myself at that point to Kairos Way and to the process of this healing journey and to what I was discovering between these two horses. And we ended up finding our sanctuary, and our herd grew like astronomically. At that time, we went from 2 horses to 6, and then we went to 16 if you included my client horses that moved in with us. So it just went like, right, just blew up. And I remember it was about 2 years after we moved here, we got a diagnosis for Indy of a degenerative disease in her front limbs, and she was in a lot of pain. She was, unfortunately built. She was a Percheron thoroughbred. She had the big, stocky Percheron body, but these super skinny little thoroughbred legs. Like it was a very unfortunate confirmation. And she really struggled. And I remember she was increasingly speaking about death. And of course, like Tiamo had walked with us in the in-between for so long, I was so used to her talking about death, but something felt very different about this. And it was the super blue moon on Halloween. The veil was impossibly thin. I remember everything felt electric. And I was out in the moonlight with my fiance and my herd. And the moon was casting shadows with everything. And Tacoma went over into the shed to hide from the moonlight, which is very unlike him. I call him my moonbeam because he's such a moon child. His moon is Cancer. He's an Aries sun, but a Cancer moon. And he is, typically in the light all the time. And so when I went to sit with him when he was in the shade, in the shadows of the shelter, I just asked, like, what's wrong? And he said, I can't handle this. Like, she's dying. I'm losing her. She doesn't want to live anymore. And that was at the time, like, where I really realized, like, oh, she's not just talking about death because she's an angel of death. She's talking about death because she's ready to become, what that soul process is for her. And I was just sitting there. I bent my head. I put my forehead to Tacoma, who was laying in the shelter just in grief. And I'm starting to cry with him. And I felt this horse come up behind me, and at first I thought it was Indy. Now, after Tiamo passed away, when she would come as the wind, it was often when I was in this moment of intimacy with my other horses, and I would feel her blowing on my neck. And she used to do this all the time when she was alive as well, where she would come up and she would just kiss my neck with her breath. And I felt this kiss, and I was like, oh, Indy, like you're doing what Tiamo did. And I just turned my head, and my partner was my fiance was in the shed with us, and he had never had an experience multidimensionally up until this point, and he actually saw her with me. It was Tiamo, who had come through the veil and was like literally there blowing on my neck. I had never seen a ghost so physically before. And what's so interesting is it was coming right up to her 10-year anniversary of death, Tiamo's. And 10 in shamanic practices is a big number for death, because it's like where the soul really gets to choose what it's going to do, right? With its process and evolution, whether it's been reincarnated or not, there's a big connection point where all veils between timelines and dimensions and lifetimes just drops. And so Tiamo was there, and she said, you do not have to worry. Like, you do not have to worry. She will be so okay, and I'm going to be the one to come and take her. And so I remember like the whole forest came alive at that point. And I actually was seeing like the life force and the intelligence of the trees going down into the roots and connecting to each other. And the universe opened up and showed me the eternal side of existence, and like the complete flow and cycle of life and death. And I remember like it was probably one of the most heart-opening experiences I have ever had, like mushrooms on steroids. Like if you've ever done mushrooms, like oh, it was nuts. Like it was like out of this world. And so fast forward, I kind of, after that experience, though, I did go back into denial a little bit. I was like, oh, well, what if I can, heal her? Or what if I can do this treatment? And because of course, Indiana was like this connection to my youth that I, like, she was my dearest sister at the time. And so anyway, I kind of gripped to life too much. I wasn't in my surrender. And sure enough, she ended up manifesting a fatal episode of colic, because she's like, girl, you are taking too long. You were supposed to help me. And so she actually even came and got me. Like I was sitting here in my office, and I look out the window, I can see my whole paddock system out the window. And she just came and like laid in the snow right at the bottom of the hill here. And sure enough, we took her to the clinic. There was nothing we could do. So I was like, she needs to come home with us. Like, I know she needs to come home with us. She needs to transition on the land, and we need to bury her there. And I knew that if she was to transition to the clinic, her soul would not be able to, yeah, I just knew she needed to come home. So we brought her home. As we're in the trailer ride home, she collapses, like she almost falls. And I go to hold her, and I feel these angel wings wrap underneath us and wrap around us and hold Indy the rest of the way home. And like Tiamo literally carried us all the way home as this angel. And we get home, we unload her, the whole herd gathers around her. And she, has her last goodbyes. I give her her final rites. Like we go through a bit of a ceremony. And it was so beautiful. The woman I had originally we had originally got her from, my mom was there. Like she had like the entire community that she had pulled together all around her. And just as she transitioned, she dropped to the ground and rolled over, and her foot, like she literally like rolled over multiple rolls. Like I've never seen a horse, and I've facilitated a lot of deaths now, and I've never seen this kind of reaction physically. She rolled off and onto the electric fence, onto the electric wire. And just as she transitioned and her soul left her body, a shock moved through her, and her soul literally blasted around the entire perimeter of our lands through the electric grid. And then an eagle, a red-tailed hawk came and flew directly over her body and grasps its talons as it passes her. And I'm like shook, right? Because that's already a pretty wild experience. And I just turned to my partner, and without even thinking about what was going to leave my mouth, I just say, she's coming right back. Like they're coming right back. And So fast forward, and I'm in grief. Tacoma's in grief, and we're out in the back hills of our land. We've got 40 acres here, and the track system goes around the back 20 acres of our hayfield. And I'm out in the far back corner. Of course, the most isolated corner of our land is called the Unicorn's Garden. And it's a space, a spiritual portal of really big informational downloads and insights. And I'm back there and I'm just sitting and I'm holding space with Tacoma, and he just looks up at me and he's like, I'm worried about what's going to happen to you when I die. And I need to know that you're going to be okay. Like, I'm getting older. At this time, Tacoma was 16, and he was like, I need to know. Like, I can feel that you're already kind of transitioning the role of our dynamic. Like, I know that things are changing between us because you're helping me go into my retirement, and like, you don't treat me like you did when I was 3, like there is a big difference there. And he's like, I need to know that you're going to be okay. I want to raise a baby with you. Like, I want to get a baby horse, and I want to raise this baby horse with the love that we have and that we share. And about 2 months before Indiana died, I was at this woman's event, and this woman randomly comes up to me, and it's an event for psychics and spiritual gurus and healers and indigenous women and medicine women. And she comes up to me and she just holds my hand and she's like, I have to tell you that I see you walking between 2 horses. At this time, she didn't know I did horse stuff. And she's like, I see you walking between 2 horses. She's a black horse with a white star and a white horse. And when you walk between these 2 horses, you are going to be carrying your full power. You are going to be holding the medicine that you came into this world to share. And you need to be ready for this soul. And then, of course, it goes out of my mind because Indy starts talking about death and blah, 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 blah. But when I'm there with Tacoma and we're talking about this baby, the first thing that pops into my mind is this black horse with this white star. And I remember the whole prophecy, and I was like, maybe she's black, a black horse with a white star. And Tacoma's like, keep going, because at this point now he's like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay, she's a rescue. And I was like, oh my gosh, can you imagine if she was a Gypsy Vanner, which has been like the breed I've swooned over my whole life. And then, of course, my left brain comes in and it's like, Gypsy Vanners are never rescues. Like, that's not going to happen. And I start going into this like thing. And he's like, no, just like put the doubt away, keep going. And I'm like, okay, she's a Gypsy Vanner, she's a rescue, but she's not all Gypsy because she's actually quite athletic. She's got something else in her. And she's really, really powerful. Like, she's not just a unicorn, she's like a dragon Pegasus. Like, she's got her wings already. Like, there's something there. And he's like, okay, cool, let's do it. And then, of course, like, I'm a super hyper monogamous kind of person. I don't know why I'm so exclusive in my love sometimes. I'm here to learn how to open my heart again and again. But of course, my remedy point is Libra because my past life was very hardcore Aries. So I'm like, yeah, just kind of like hyper individuality, hyper independence. Like, that's my default. I have to work to be more Libra. So I like push myself to go almost like over the top with it, as like a challenge to my soul. And so, black is actually my color, but I wear pink because I'm trying to grow. So I ended up like just kind of letting go of this whole vision. And I started to cling to Tacoma again. And I started to dread change and the change that was happening in our relationship. And I started to fear death again. And I was holding too tightly to life, and he ended up getting sick. And I should say, actually, just a week after we had the original conversation about this baby, bringing a baby into our life, I was gifted a white rose. And I didn't have any inclination of what it was about. So I just put it on my altar in the barn, and I just left it there as like a blessing to the space. But it is relevant. So remember that piece, this white rose. And of course, a white rose is a symbol of reincarnation. A white rose is the symbol of Mary Magdalene, the one who rose from the dead. So it's like all these pieces that I just didn't consciously put together. Anyway, Tacoma gets sick. I'm clinging to life. I'm not embracing the lessons that I've been given. And I go down to him and I'm like, what do you need? And he's like, I need you to go back to that conversation we had. I don't need any more herbs. I don't need any more of this. Like, I need you to go and go back to the conversation we had. So I came right inside the house and I just texted my friend, the first friend that came into my mind who has a rescue. And I said, hey, can you send me what you've got for babies? Like, what do you have? About 6 or 7 months old. And sure enough, she sends me this picture right away, like no hesitation in getting back to me. And it's this beautiful strawberry roan Tennessee Walker mare with a baby on her hip. And at first I can't really see the baby, so I swipe and I'm swiping and I'm starting to like slowly, my jaw is just dropping because this baby on her hip is this like little fuzzy fairy-eared black horse with a white star. And the white star is so big, it's like a cyclops eye on her forehead. And I'm like, Cindy, what is this horse bred with? And she's like, oh, she's a Gypsy Vanner cross. And I was like, I have to meet this filly like as soon as possible. And so we end up going to meet her. They said, nobody can get up to her. She's really, really shy, blah, 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 blah. When I'm walking up to her, she lets out this huge whinny. And when we had gone to go get Indiana back, like after my mom had sold her and she had been gone for 6 or 7 years and she had gone through serious neglect and abuse in that time frame, I got there and she let out this huge whinny upon seeing me. And I ended up just like jumping on her back because the person said, oh, nobody can ride her, she's wild, nobody can catch her. And I was like, hey, Indy. And I like got up on her back bareback and just like rode her up to the trailer and jumped off and she walked right into the trailer. And it was almost like my way of like showing them that they had done something to her soul that she didn't agree with. And it wasn't that she wasn't rideable, it's that she didn't want them to ride her. And it was like my final lesson to give these people before I took Indy home. And that's what it felt like when I approached this filly. Subconsciously, I remembered, but consciously, I hadn't pieced it together yet. I walked up to this horse that was apparently unapproachable, apparently unhandled, and she just let out this massive remembrance, this massive call of remembrance. And I walked up to her and she's nuzzling my hair, and you could tell it was like a sense memory, but we had never met in this life yet. And so like I just completely fell in love with her. She fell in love with me. We had arranged to pick her up because they wanted to wean her early. There was no real say in the matter, so I just went with it. Would have loved for her to have stayed with mom, and in hindsight I would have adopted mom if I could have. It was what it was. I went into ceremony right before we picked her up to take her home to retrieve her name. And I went into ceremony with my mentors, and Rhiannon Roosevine came to mind. Rhiannon I think Rhiannon was like the Irish Gypsy Vanner kind of name. And then Roosevine was to honor her Tennessee Walker twangy lady kind of side. Kind of ancestry. And I was like, oh, this is such a beautiful name. And then I started to go into the retrieval of the name and the meaning. And Rhiannon is the goddess of life and death. And Roosevine is a really, really fancy name for white rose. And so I was like, oh, that's like almost spooky. And of course, my mind is still like, I was still in my left brain because I was like in defensive mode. And I wasn't piecing it all together. We go to pick her up, we load her into the trailer. I trailer with my horses, like, you do you, but I'm like in the back box with them for every trailer ride. My partner has no say. Highway or not, I'm there. So I'm like in the back box with my horses and with this little filly, and she's just like walking around and around. And I brought the essence of rose with me, and I put the essence on my hand, and she just stops dead, and she turns and she looks at me, and it was like this absolute multidimensional. I felt like I was on psychedelics, like I was hallucinating or something, because her cyclops eye, this giant star, bloomed into a white rose. And with that blooming came this massive download, and all of a sudden I'm just sobbing, and I'm looking at her and I'm like, you're Indiana and you're Tiamo. You're Indiana and Tiamo. And she just looks at me with these big, beautiful, pure almond eyes, and she just blinks yes. Like, she's like, you got it. I remember you. And she was like completely imprinted on me from that point forward. She was quiet and calm in the trailer, leaning against me for support, completely okay with the whole process. She's like, I'm coming home. Like, it's okay that I'm leaving my mom. I'm coming home. And it was like the rest was history. We got home and Tacoma remembered her, and Tacoma was like, "You brought our baby back! Like, this is so exciting!" And he's a territorial guy. Like, he's a Crypt Orchid stallion, and he has these tendencies to be quite dominant and aggressive even. And of course, that's a predisposition for Aries, being ruled by Mars. But he was like, she brought out his full Cancer moon. Like, he was the ultimate nurturer, wanting to nourish her and care for her. It was like nothing I've seen before. And of course, I'm like just in my bubble of bliss with my new little baby and reunited with my sisters. And I start going through like the memories and the stories, and I'm piecing it together. And I realized that that white rose was gifted to me on her birthday.
Oh, shit.
On her birthday. And then I'm like, okay, universe, can you show me a sign? Like, just affirm to me that this is, in fact, of course, I had already gotten so many signs, but I'm like, give me another one.
More.
I'm like, yeah, more. And I end up, and so actually, I do have to mention, I forgot this part of the story. After Indiana passed away, the Northern Lights came out that night, which is very, very common. Almost every time I facilitate a transitioning for a horse, the Northern Lights come out. Almost every single time, because I work with a lot of rainbow fire and with the ceremonial rites that we give to these horses before they transition. Like, I just find that the Northern Lights is very connected to those elementals. And so the Northern Lights had come out for Indy, and I'm sitting with my herd on the hill that she was buried in under these lights. And a giant owl comes and lands in the tree above us. And I immediately took that as a representation of her spirit safely transitioning, and this is the animal that's now going to help to communicate on her behalf. And so I'm sitting there, and I walk out to Rosavine. Sorry, after I had asked, I'm jumping a little bit, so hopefully you're following. I walk back out to Rosavine after I had asked this universe to give me another sign, and at Rosavine's feet is a red-tailed hawk feather and an owl feather side by side, like side by side. I have them on a dream catcher over top of my bed now. Like, I instantly got chills through my body, and like, it was just, and they were in pristine condition too. Like, they were like perfect. And I was like, this is so freaking magical, but like, can I have another sign? So I'm like, and this is actually really funny, because I was like, I need a sign. Like, I need a sign that I can like just, I don't know, like solidify all of this. I don't know why my brain is struggling so much to wrap around this and comprehend this. And sure enough, I have this like massive literal sign in my tack room that has all of my horses' constellations painted on it. It's like this big, beautiful picture of dark rolling clouds with all the stars and stuff of our individual constellations. And so I take this sign down and I get myself all set up. I open up sacred space to put her constellations into the star grid of our herd. And as I'm painting it, I recognize, holy shit, here is the literal sign. She's a Gemini, and the Gemini constellation is two twins or two sisters holding hands. So it was Indy and Tiamo united in this being. And then of course I had a whole new understanding of what the Gemini energy is. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm like, I believe. I am on my knees, I believe. Like, this is it. This is the truth of reincarnation. This is the absolute miracle of love and life and death and the infinite cycle of the evolution of our souls and of our spirits. And like, it was just this absolute profound awakening for me. And you know, like when I walk out there, and of course now I have Tacoma, my white horse, and Rosavine, my black horse with the white star, who's helping to raise this beautiful, beautiful being off of the legacy of our love and off of the lessons of our love. And, you know, it's just like this absolute full circle moment. And since she's been here, and she is like dragon through and through, And she's so much like Indy, and she's so much like Camo, but she's also so much like herself. And I'm starting to recognize like the boundaries and the barriers between self and others and co-creation. And it's so beautiful to me because, like you had mentioned in your original question, like, can we exist in different timelines? Well, Indiana still exists to me, right? Tiamo still exists to me. Their love exists through the legacy that they lived through and touched in every other life, in every other friendship, in every other love that they've had. They are still very real, just like the archetypes, these external deities are actually a part of us. It's all interconnected. And so they still exist, but they also have evolved, and they're in an entirely new existence now at this point. And that doesn't make any which reality more or less than. It's all connected to the totality of what is this life, what is this universe. Just like the owls were extensions of their legacy, but still also completely and entirely themselves, just like the red-tailed hawk was, just like the white rose.
That needs to be like a children's book or something that you're gonna need
I
to
know,
like
it's so
that
good.
entire story. I feel like I just went on this like wild adventure and I don't even know what time it
Magical
is. I don't know
journey.
where we are. I don't know what's going on. But I will say, which is so interesting, is that earlier when I was getting ready, I had one call before this and I was in my bathroom and we have tons of red-tailed hawks. And I always think of Shaylee because she's always talking about her hawks. And I have tons of hawks here that live in our eucalyptus forest right here. And I had this exact thought that was getting ready and I don't know what they're doing out there. I don't know if it's like springtime and they're doing their thing or like whatever, but they were so loud and they were like, I was like, are they fighting? Are they playing? Like, what is going on? Because it wasn't like they were just out there making normal sounds. It was like a ruckus. And I was like, what is going on? To the point where I like noticed it and I had a conversation with myself about it. So I love that you're talking about this and this conversation is coming up. And then I saw Brittany said a red-tailed hawk just flew over to watch over my girls and my mom and I out in their pastures. And like, they're all coming to join the pod.
I know. I saw it, like my little hawk family is circling and it's such a cool thing. Man, this story is so crazy and it's so wild to me when you talk about twin flames because there's so much that I resonate with in this story. And like, even down to the age where you're like, when you slipped back into that realism and you're like Tacoma's 16, I like that's where I'm at with my horse Kip right now. And when Bro transitioned, he said that I needed to get a baby horse. And so now I have a baby horse. And it's like, I'm listening to all this stuff, right? And so I asked him, when we do this podcast with Emily, like, I want to know if I need to book a session with her. Like, do we need to go further? Like, am I ready to dive into this with like Kip and Fern? And like, what do I need to know? Guess what the fuck his symbol is? A butterfly. And what is behind you? A bunch of freaking butterflies. So I'm like, oh, there's my signing your sign. So this whole conversation has been super fun. And I love all of that. We do have one question. Um, Brittany was saying spring in the northern hemisphere is opposite spring in the southern hemisphere. So I feel like generally speaking, the northern and southern hemisphere born horses are different astrological signs. Have you noticed any patterns with people and their horses within that as you're talking about reflection of each other?
And the first thing that popped up in my mind was Kiro Cairo, right? The yin or the
Mm.
yang expression of the same entity. Yeah. So I think like depending on, I mean, and astrologically, it is based off of the actual like evolutionary astrology or tropical astrology is based off of the equinoxes and the solstices. And it is different, right, depending on the hemisphere. So I do notice that like in the southern hemisphere it might be a different expression, like Aries isn't spring, Aries is autumn, so you're going to be getting the opposite expression of one archetype, or even just the feminine versus masculine expression. And it also depends on your own soul's predisposition to those different expressions. Like, is your soul more elementally connected to this? Like if you're more feminine in your natural energetics or elementals, then you might connect more to a particular predisposition. So it's not always about where you're from. Sometimes it's about your actual makeup and the grand totality of it all. But yes, like definitely there are differences depending on where you are and what the climate energetically, so to speak, is of the area that you're in. So it's kind of like, yeah, when you're talking about the Centaurian archetype that created the way for evolution between humans and horses, it could be Kiro or it could be Cairo, depending on which part you're identifying with. It could be the the feminine or the masculine expression of particular archetypes, depending on what hemisphere you're born in. Really good question. Definitely.
Yeah, it's also fascinating. I am also definitely booking a session with you. I know we're kind of like over, but we probably need to have another conversation. Can we have a part two?
I'm
I
in.
I have felt, and I've told Shaylee, I feel like this herd that I've had has been with me from the beginning of my career, where I had lesson horses that I'd rescued and used. And I swear I can look at each of the horses that I have now and I'm like, oh, that's you, that's you, that's you. And it's always something that I've said and it just feels so true to me. And then partially I'm like, and I'm probably crazy. But it's almost like it's undeniable when I look at my horse Flirt that he is my first horse Copper. Like I look at them and I'm like, that is you. Like there's no question. And I've always been like, I wonder if that's even a thing. And so I love that whole entire conversation. And we could go forever with that conversation because I have so many questions.
Well, and then of course, like you look at these original connections, right? So like Chiron or Kirin was the original dragon unicorn that was turned into the centaur, Hero or Cairo.
Mhm.
And then you have this masculine feminine mix of human and horse that ends up going through this massive spiritual journey of separation and union simultaneously, and then like resets the evolution of the human evolution. And but then what happened after they reincarnated and they met each other in the forest and they went to go live this species inclusive lifestyle where it was like human living with horses and horses deciding to live with humans. Well, then the herd grew, and then you had these beings that weren't necessarily forced into the Centaurian existence in the Centaurian multiverse, but chose to exist in the Centaurian multiverse, right? And so to me, that is Rosaline.
Mm-hmm.
That is like Brianna and Rosaline. That was Tiamo and Indiana. That's
Mm-hmm.
why she has her wings.
Right.
So, so inherently, like with Tacoma, I had to very, very strategically and meticulously help to open his wings over
Mm-hmm.
time. But with Rosaline, they are just like out and open, right? And so like yeah, there's so many different archetypal evolutions that have taken place with the creation of our actual herds too. So if you're
Yeah.
a herd mama, like
Mhm.
there's so much to look into the connection points there as well. It's so endless, so
Oh,
beautiful.
I think we should both do sessions with her and then we'll do a part two podcast because
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't want to stop talking and I feel like us
I
each
know.
having a deeper understanding of this and more with Emily, and then we come back and do
Yeah.
more.
That would be so fun because
Because I
I'm
don't want
like,
to
now I'm like,
stop.
oh my gosh, I have twin flames. Like, I really do. It's so crazy. I have twin flames. They are like inseparable. Like, I keep saying, two mouths, one blade of grass. Like, they literally are like so connected. And it was so strange because I brought her home and I just instantly knew that I could integrate her into the herd, and, like, she just fit perfectly, and Kip, like, took her under his wing and was like, "I'm raising this baby." And then I had my plant medicine journey last week, and when I was meeting all of my herd, I could not separate her from him. Like, every time I looked at her, she became him. It was the weirdest thing, and I was so tripped out by it, and then I was thinking, "Maybe my brain is just, like, in overdrive right now," but then you're telling all of these parts and pieces of your story, and I see the butterflies behind you, and your horse was 16, and I have a baby with a star, and I'm just like, "Oh my god, like, I gotta talk more about this."
I
I
love
think,
it. I'm in.
yeah,
Awesome.
we definitely need to do that. And I think one more thing is that my favorite part about these conversations, no matter who we're talking to, is that you and everyone that we've had conversations with, and then us deeply in the work and understanding so much, but then still needing a signee or sign, because I think that that
Mm-hmm.
helps people. And it's like what we're about. It's like being completely authentic and like, yeah, you can be so embedded in it and so understanding of everything and teaching it and living it and embodying it. And then you're like, but I need a sign or sign. Like, and that's like the best part, because I feel like people then feel like, oh, okay, like I am doing just fine. And just because I am wherever I am at in my journey, I should just trust completely. I'm like, oh, we're still humans. We're still doing human things, and it's totally okay to just accept that part. So I love that. I love that whole piece. Do you
And the
have,
universe, oh, yeah,
no, go
sorry.
ahead.
The
I think
universe
there's
has
a,
such a good sense of humor, you know? Like
Yeah.
they're like it's so happy to give us silly humans more signs. It's like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's like chuckles to itself. You know, it's like, sure, you silly little human, here you go.
so we want to just circle back and check in with you with any offerings that you have right now that you want to share with everybody. How can they connect with you and work with you? I'm asking for myself.
Yeah, so I have a couple different offerings right now. Horse Love is a community space that I've created for sacred storytelling and like different blessings and lessons and downloads that have come through my horses specifically. There's a membership, annual or monthly. You can cancel it at any time, and when you become a member, you get access to all of the past recordings. So there's like over 30 hours of sacred storytelling and dream decoding and animal communication and just like all sorts of things. I'm a manifesting generator as a human design, so I've like thrown everything into there. It's kind of just like, what? Here you go. And that's really beautiful. And when you're a member of Horse Love, you actually get a discount on sessions. So my signature offering is Kiro's Way Sessions, which is to support your own Centaurian artistry and Centaurian understanding. So it's like kind of everything we just talked about, plus, embodiment, soma exercises, getting back into touch with those essences and helping your horse as well, and helping your horse really feel empowered in their role in your life, essentially. So that signature offering, when you're a Horse Love Lunar member, you get a discount. So you could actually become a Horse Love Lunar member for a whole month and get a session, and it would be the same exchange as if you were to just book a single session. And I did it that way because I want people to have access to that library for the integration process after their session. So it just really kind of complements each other. And then I also do a specific kind of artistry. They're called blessing bands. And so it's essentially a medicine wheel or a medicine bundle that I weave for your Centaurian stitch. And it actually sits on the horse's neck, right at the point of the heart and the Centaurian soul stitch between horse and human. And it helps to offer healing, grounding, integration, liberation. They're like extremely, extremely magical pieces. They are not to be mistaken with Furtak. They're actual sacred adornments. And it's like a living spell, prophecy, and promise all in one. Like it's quite powerful. And so I usually recommend that people, it's like an investment piece. Like when you go into that, I recommend that people are like really committed to this journey and to the awakening of Kiro's and Kairos lessons, because it is an initiation piece. It's not just something to be taken lightly. By the time you get a blessing band, you're like, okay, yeah, I want these downloads. I want to work with Cairo's medicine. I want to connect with Chiron, the original unicorn. Like, I want this medicine. So there is that as well. And then I do offer like retreats and workshops and immersional experiences, like private ones, where I
Shaylee,
either
we should go.
travel, I either
We
travel
want
to
to
you or
come.
you come to me. Yeah. And it's like, we have like luxury picnics up on the hilltop, which is the dragon portal. We have like walks through the unicorn's garden. Like it's really, really beautiful. And I do them either for 1 day up to 5 days. So, and it's like there's a old cabin just across the road from us. Eventually I want to have like my own yurts on the land so people can stay on the land, but we're not there yet. So you can stay in this. It's a historical heritage building. It's the first cabin that was actually built in this area in the early 1700s. So that's really, really cool. And yeah, it's just so that those are kind of a mix of my offerings, and you can just select whichever one calls to you. They're all laid out on my website too, like the booking portal, the portal to sign up for Horse Love. It's all there.
Perfect. And what is that website?
Cool.
Just www.heroesway or kairosway.com. I like to say both versions, depending on, so it's like whatever you identify best with.
They're both there for you.
They're both there for you. Felt the same way.
Well, thank you so much. That was so much fun. We really appreciate you spending all this time with us, and we're definitely going to hang out with you again because I need more.
Thank you guys so much. I felt so safe to just pour it all out for you.
Yeah, super fun and good.